Silvan name has been established over the last 60 years in part by the employees following the values introduced by my father.
Well, before Dad started Sylvan, he would go into the Vic market. I remember all through my childhood, my father getting up at 1 or 2 in the morning, you know, to go into the market. And then probably when I was about 3, he started Sylvan, so he'd go into the market and then he would go to his new business, which was Sylvan. So he was like gone from like 1 o'clock in the morning till 6 or 7 when he came home at night. There was an office and that he had, I think it was West Melbourne or Peel Street rings a bell. And then my memories are personally, Peel Street I've seen photos of with certain people, you know, like, which ring a bell. But then my memory is when he and Jimmy Socchio built Ross Street. Then, like, I was still very, very young, so I'd go in and at the holidays, you know, when I was a young teenager, just holidays, working there or, you know, going in with Dad. And I know by then, see, I was really close with Tony Siv. I probably still am. And he was working, well, he's the same age as me. He was a couple of years older. He was working there. He started working at Ross Street.
How did it start, let me think? Okay, stacking the boxes, etc. And then just started to learn other things within the business there. I was working in spare parts, packing parts, picking parts. I was doing deliveries. In those days we did ute deliveries and trailer deliveries into the rail yards in Dynon Road, Spencer Street, and all the Footscray transport depots, which was, yeah, that was an experience. So, yeah, I had to learn out of an old logbook that I had there. The addresses were very vague and there was no GPSs, trust me. So, yeah, things were a bit difficult sometimes delivering, but we got the job done. Yeah, got a lot of good experience, a lot of driving experience.
I answered a job ad in the paper for a driver storeman, came for the interview, and about a week later I got the phone call to say I've got an interview and got the job. I walked in the first day, straight away for me it was obvious that it was more of a family orientated business. I didn't know a lot about the business. I was certainly made very welcome when I first started, and then out onto the job. And I think Sylvan at that stage was about 30, 35 people in South Melbourne. So it was 30 to 35 people, I think. But very much a family company. And just to give you an example, if a container came, everybody just dropped tools and went and unloaded the container. There's some of the early memories of working at Silvan, and I just remember meeting Michael Tricarico, and when I met him he was stood out in the store area, and I was on the phone talking to a customer. Then he came over and introduced himself. And I had no idea that he was the owner. And I thought that was pretty special that the owner would actually come down and welcome someone into the business.
In January 1980, Tony was employing for the position that I eventually got, and there were two people who finished going for the job, Michael Frost and myself. Michael got the job, and I was working around the corner just because at that time you could get a job wherever you liked, shop, whatever. There was jobs galore. So I had a couple of odd jobs after I left uni, and then applied for this one in 1980. in January. It missed out, and then in June 1980, Tony rang me up and said, "Would you like the job?" I said, "Yes, Tony, I would have liked the job 6 months ago. I would take the job."
I was an engineer. I had a Bachelor of Engineering in Agriculture, so I came in as an engineer. Sylvan had an engineer prior to that, but he'd gone, and I think there'd been a gap of 2 or 3 years, maybe more, where they didn't have an engineer. So I came in as sort of fresh engineer, so I didn't have much to learn from. I didn't have anyone to teach me. We just sort of picked it up and off we went. So yeah, it was the engineering was my role when I began with Silvan.
I think Michael Trick was always keeping his eye on what was going on overseas, the Italians, whatever they came up with, and got ideas from that. 12-volt range out of the, the truck pack, the U-pack and the like, and that was a real kick along. Our linkage units, getting ideas there, and I think the original 400 litre unit probably did come from Italy, but then we improved on that design because there was a couple of phases. Whatever comes from Italy is not the same. Working hard in Italy is not the same as here. It's a lot harder here. So let's put it that way.
When we started, we were building linkage sprayers and air blast sprayers. That was the main operation. We didn't sell any merchandise. We sold a few Volpe knapsacks, Volpe hand sprayers and knapsacks. We thought we sold a lot, but it was nothing.
So the business went through quite a few changes. When I retired a couple of years ago, I was looking after the rural side of the business, more the rural merchandisers. Had looked after the machinery businesses before. I'd done a lot of the roles.
Basically, we're building machinery, but over time we started to be able to build more because we did a few things. One is we were using fiberglass tanks, and step by step we changed to plastic tanks, which allowed us to build more tanks more quickly.
I think the selector change that was straight away became apparent within 2 years. This would really change the structure of the business, and I look around the business and I see so many products that, say 30 years ago we wouldn't have. I say we, I shouldn't say we because I'm not here anymore, but Sylvan has. And the Sherlock acquisition was a big one because that all of a sudden moved us into more of the domestic markets with the Sherlock wheelbarrows and that type of thing.
So the linkage units progressively have been very good. The 12-volt range has been very good. Funny enough, I think bad times always makes you a bit smarter too.
Yep. Some of our tanks now, the moulds are 35 years old and we're still using them. Yeah, so they last a long time.
It got bigger, but then there was more people too. And Dad did trust other people with decisions. And we spoke about that a lot. Dad would say, if someone makes a mistake and I really bawl them out like it do to me, he said, well, then they stop making decisions, and that's bad.
So I worked for a supplier of Silvan. So the company I worked for pre-Silvan was an electronics company supplying rate controllers and that sort of thing. So I'd had some connection with Silvan in that role, helping at field days or being sort of working with Silvan people at field days. I was involved in some Silvan dealer training pre-Silvan, so supporting the Silvan guys with that, and it was probably in conversations with some of the people at Silvan or working at Silvan at that time that I felt like the people were good to get along with, felt they sort of articulated it was a good business to work for. So it sowed the seed, as it were, that maybe that's a business that at some point down the track that I wouldn't mind working for.
Where do you want to start? Another ordinary day. My first job was probably stacking boxes. I think I started at 6:30, 7 o'clock. I can't remember now. And that was my first job, just stacking some knapsacks. There you go, in a storeroom. But yeah, it was just a job in between jobs until something better came along.
Yeah, 11th of May, 1993. Yeah. Yes, because my daughter was born the very next day. Well, I went for the job interview with Ron Bays. He was the production manager at the time. Didn't think to tell him that my partner's pregnant, you know. So I went for the job interview, got the job, started straight away, and the very next day I got the phone call.
Yeah, so I worked with Michael in the market, in the fruit and veggie market. I worked in the market and I was one of the first to start, so I'd start at midnight. And then I'd work through and do the deliveries after everybody else was going home. This went on for years, you know, that I'd be first in, last out. And then I started to get that way that I couldn't get up every day. And the boss said, I think you better find another job. And then Michael heard about it and said, come and work with me.
I started with the business because they'd purchased a business that I already worked for. So I worked for a company called Waratah. We predominantly made slashes and other agricultural equipment. Obviously, Sylvan must have thought that it was a good fit into their business, and it turns out it has been, absolutely. We're still making slashes today, so, you know, that's great. So when they bought the business, they inherited me.
I worked with Tony Cimarella, so he worked in warranty, so I worked directly under him. So it's all the stuff that came back for warranty, and not only that, they used to do repairs back then too. Mechanic by trade, so that's where I went to then.
I remember the interview. Yeah, because I started and I was going for a job in the warehouse, in dispatch at the time, if they call it that. So I remember that, being nervous, and I think the biggest thing sort of memory I have is the job initially the plan was that I'd work for a short period of time and maybe go back to university. But yeah, here I am, 28, 29 years later.
I was 16 years old. I'm a mechanic, or apprentice mechanic. I lose my job for whatever reason, and I need a job. So I find this job at Silvan. Never heard of them before, and it's just supposed to be a fill-in job until I get my license. A couple of years. Pay's all right because I'm young. I'm getting paid more than most of my friends because they're all at school working part-time jobs. So I'm thinking, yeah, this is all right. And then yeah, so. Turned 18 to get my license, I'm still there. 20 years later, I'm still here.
The previous production manager was a friend of mine, and he referred me for the job. When I first started, there was no computer on my desk, and I loved that.
My previous work, I used to drive about an hour from Ferntree Gully to Heidelberg, and when I come back, it took more than an hour. So my wife said, why don't we just look somewhere close? And I looked up on the internet, found Sylvan 5 minutes from home. Exactly 5 minutes from home.
So in saying that, I do have had a lot of experience in warehouse work with Mercedes-Benz Australia, okay, for probably about 2.5, 3 years when I was a bit of a younger fella. And So I started to apply for other jobs and whatnot, and I spotted this one for Silvan. I thought, geez, that's a bit different, agriculture. And I thought, well, I have done a little bit of work on a farm, and I thought, well, this could be interesting. So I applied for the job, and then before I knew it, I got a job and we were pick and packing parts in Huntingdale. And back in those days, we had a retail counter as well, so we had a massive showroom there. But one thing that I did notice that really stood out to me was the fact that it was a young company, right? And when I say young, maybe 20, 30 years old, but it was a privately owned company. Keeping in mind, I've come from Mercedes-Benz, very corporatised, right? So I had a look around, and I looked and I went, you know what? I think there's a really good opportunity here for me to really put in 150% and start a career with these guys. I like the products, the people are great, and I thought this is a really good opportunity. So yeah, from then on, that's where it all started.
Been in the industry for years prior, so I'd had a 13-year stint out working for myself, doing renovations on houses and handyman work and stuff like that. And we were actually flying back from Fiji after going for a wedding, and I said to my wife, I'm sick and tired of all the plaster dust and the tile glue and everything like that. So she said, apply for a job. Draw a line under your jobs and apply for jobs. So that's what I did. And I'd always liked the spraying side of the business. And I just sent an application off to each one, and within hours of my application, I must have just jagged it. It just seemed to be a whirlwind. Next thing, I'm at an airport meeting in Brisbane, getting interviewed, and wham bam.
First day, I remember it was a cold day, being June, so going in, and the Wanturna Lewis Road site was quite cold, and so I do remember that. It was double brick, and the inside was double brick. We had all the heaters going, but no, the hospitality was brilliant. Both from the managing director at the time and also Michael Senior. He certainly looked after us and made us feel very, very comfortable in the place. So that's probably one of the main reasons. And the other reason I came across was there was a gentleman by the name of Peter Scobell, who was the accountant at the time, and he rang me. I used to work for him. He goes, "Oh, look, there's a job going. You'll love the culture. The owner loves everybody, and so that was really, really good." He said, come for an interview, and I came across for the interview, and they had the coffee machine going, and it was brilliant. Yeah. So that's really the reason I decided to move across.
I'd worked in Lewis Road, Wanturna for 20 years at a company called Chromatic Seating, which just happened to be next door to Sylvan. So for 20 years I was next door to Sylvan, and I knew very little about them, other than in those days a lot of fiberglass tanks that were in the yard.
Okay, well, to start off with, one of my friends worked here, and she said to me one day out of the blue, "Do you know anyone who'd like to come in over Christmas and do some packaging?" And I went, "I'll do it." And they put me on and tried me out, and I've been here ever since.
Peter Cram's kids did a mail drop when they were younger, because I lived in Wanturna, the area, because they used to just do mail drops in the mailbox, and I answered the ad.
So I started with Sylvan in 1997, and I had several interviews before I met Michael J, and I was sitting in his interview and we were just going through the general questions, and Michael Senior comes in and in the middle of my interview, holding 2 mangoes. And Michael J had said, "Oh, Dad, have you met Sarah?" And so I got introduced to Michael Senior, and then Michael Senior proceeded to tell me what beautiful mangoes are in this season and asked me to smell them. So very first interview with, well, not very first interview with Sylvan, but the second or third, and I'm smelling mangoes. And right there and then I just thought, what a great company, this is going to be fun.
The boss of Comet called me and say, "You have to take care of this area, you know, that is Australia, New Zealand and so on." And this was 23 years ago. At that time, my English was, till today, I make a lot of mistakes, but my English at that time was really basic, you know. And the very first step I did when I joined Comet was to come to Australia. And I had to meet the customer for the industrial products and, of course, also Silvan. And the boss told me, "Yes, but the first one you will visit is Silvan." I arrived here in Australia at 6 o'clock in the morning, and guess who came to the airport to pick me up at 6 o'clock in the morning? It was Michael Tricarico, okay, himself. He took me to have a coffee in a place of an Italian friend. The following stop we did was in a shop to buy some salad, some tomatoes, some things, because he would like to organize and cook himself a lunch for his people. And that was the sensation I always had coming in here. You were coming to a family.
When I came to the company, it was a family company basically. You know, we had John Trick, his brother, we had Teresa, his sister, and we had Lynn, another sister, all working at Silvan. And then you had Julie, his daughter, and his nephew, Tony Silvan, down the back. So it was everyone. So there was almost 2 families in the beginning.
He was fantastic for me, but I know he was fantastic for a lot of people. And you know, I always remember one day I was a bit down because I'd lost a staff member who decided after 6 or 7 years to move on. And I always remember him saying, "Look, some will stay, some will go." He said, "You can't change that. All you can do is do what you can do when they're here." And I thought about it, and I thought to myself later, it's really a good way of looking at it. They're here for that journey rather than be disappointed they've gone. And he also said, as long as they go to something better, that's good for them.
When my father retired, he came down to the factory, and my father was a dentist, and he came down to the factory, and Michael, like he did with his lunches that he put on always, he invited my father and myself into the lunch, and he said to my father at that time, he said, "I've noticed what your son does. He is so focused on doing what for the company, he can have a job at Sylvan for as long as he wants."
I just think there's always that sort of family feel to the place.
It's the culture here. It's the culture, it's the people. And it's a type of company that we're giving back. We're helping the environment. You know, we're helping the farmers with their machinery and the land itself. So for me, that's important.
We always came back to product with him. All my conversations with him, we would end up talking about what can we do? What can we do that's different, or how can we evolve our current range to bring it into the modern day or make it ready for the next group of customers that we're trying to target. But it was amazing how much he could draw on the past but apply it to the modern day.
I probably can speak on behalf of a lot of us. We still believe we work for Michael. I don't think that'll change. It's been a great company to work for. Like, you know, Frosty, and who's been with the company for a long time, recently retired, Leo Riley, Peter Cram, Tony Civarelli, you know, a lot of us guys have been with the company for a long, long time. And I'd have to say we'd all share the same passion for the company. Okay, it's products, it's people, and it's a way of life.
Our task each day now is to uphold the values established in the early days to ensure the Silvan name is around for another 60 years.